His name was Marco Rivera, 38 years old, a single dad living in a small apartment in the east side of San Antonio, Texas. Every morning, he woke up before the sun, not because he wanted to, because he had to. He had a daughter to feed, bills to pay, and a job he needed to keep. His daughter, Sophia, was 9 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's smile, and she was everything he had left in this world. Marco worked at a mid-sized logistics company called Pinnacle Supply Company. He had been there for 6 years. 6 years of showing up on time, staying late, and never complaining. 6 years of giving everything he had to a job that never gave much back. He wasn't the most polished guy in the room. He didn't wear expensive suits or talk with big words. But he worked hard, and everyone who actually knew him knew that. That Thursday morning started just like any other. Marco packed Sophia's lunch, walked to the school bus stop, and kissed her on the forehead. He told her he'd be back before dinner. He didn't know that by the end of that day, everything would change. Not just for him, but for the man who tried to break him. Some stories start with a win. This one starts with a man who was pushed down to the ground in front of the person he loved most. But don't go anywhere, because the ending is something else entirely. Marco Rivera's life was not easy, but he never asked for easy. After his wife, Carmen, passed away from an illness when Sophia was just 3 years old, Marco became both mom and dad overnight. He learned how to braid hair, even though his fingers were thick and clumsy. He learned how to make arroz con leche because it was Sophia's favorite. He learned how to be there, even when he was exhausted. He worked the early shift at Pinnacle Supply Company, starting at 6 in the morning and finishing at 3 in the afternoon. That schedule was perfect. It meant he could pick Sophia up from school, help her with homework, and still have dinner ready before 8. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his life, and he was proud of it. At work, Marco was a warehouse coordinator. He managed shipment records, organized inventory, and made sure deliveries went out on time. He was good at his job. Very good. His team liked him. His numbers were always clean. He never missed a deadline. But his direct supervisor, a man named Derek Hollis, had never liked Marco, not from day one. Derek was 45 years old, tall, loud, and always dressed like he was trying to impress someone. He talked over people in meetings. He took credit for other people's work. And he had a particular habit of making Marco feel small. Marco never understood why. He never argued back. He kept his head down and did his work. But some people, they see a quiet man, and they think it means he's weak. Derek Hollis had made that mistake for 6 years. He was about to make it one final time. It was a Thursday in October. The air in San Antonio was finally starting to cool down a little. Marco had a light feeling that morning. Sophia had a half day at school, which meant she was coming to his workplace after noon. The company allowed it occasionally. He had already told his team, and everyone was fine with it. Sophia loved visiting. She'd sit quietly at his desk, draw in her notebook, and eat the snack he packed for her. She was a good kid, patient and calm for her age. Marco arrived at work at 5:58, 2 minutes early as always. He logged in, checked his shipment board, and got to work. By 10 in the morning, everything was moving smoothly. Then, just before noon, something went wrong with the delivery record. A vendor had sent incorrect documentation, and 2 shipments were flagged in the system. It wasn't Marco's fault. The error came from the vendor's side. Marco had already sent a correction request and was waiting for confirmation. But Derek Hollis didn't wait for explanations. He walked into the warehouse floor at 11:45, face red, voice loud. He had a printed report in his hand. He waved it around like it was evidence of crime. "Rivera!" he shouted across the floor. Everyone stopped. Every single person on that floor turned to look. Marco stood up slowly from his desk. He was calm. He always tried to stay calm. He said quietly, "I'm already handling it, Derek." But Derek wasn't done. He was just getting started. Derek Hollis didn't care who was watching. That was the thing about him. He liked an audience. The more people around, the bigger he got. And on that Thursday afternoon, the warehouse floor was full. At least 15 co-workers were present, moving boxes, scanning items, checking manifests. And then there was Sophia. She had arrived just minutes before, backpack on her back, snack in hand, sitting quietly in the chair next to Marco's desk. She was coloring in her notebook. She didn't understand what was happening at first. Derek slapped the printed report down on Marco's desk. Hard. Sophia flinched. You want to explain this disaster? Derek said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. 6 years here, and you still can't manage a basic vendor file? This is embarrassing. Marco took a breath. The error came from the vendor, Derek. I've already filed the correction. It'll be resolved within the hour. That's not good enough. Derek snapped. I'm tired of making excuses for your mistakes. Tired of cleaning up after you. Honestly, I don't know how you're still here. The room went completely silent. Even the machine seemed to stop humming. Marco stood very still. He could feel Sophia's eyes on him. He didn't look at her. He didn't want her to see his face right then, because his face was showing something he worked very hard to hide. Pain. Real, deep pain. Not from the words. He had heard worse. But because his daughter was watching. And no father wants his child to see him treated like he was nothing. Sophia Rivera put down her colored pencil. She was 9 years old, but she was not a naive child. She had grown up fast. Kids who lose a parent early, they grow up fast. She understood more than adults gave her credit for. She had seen her father tired. She had seen him stressed. She had seen him count coins on the kitchen table, late at night, when he thought she was asleep. But she had never seen him look the way he looked right now. He was standing straight, back stiff, hands at his sides, eyes steady. He looked like someone who was choosing, very carefully, not to break. And she understood that choice. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just watched. Derek kept going. He said something about Marco being a liability. He said something about carrying dead weight. He used the word embarrassment. Again, some of the co-workers looked away. One woman, Rosa, who had worked with Marco for 4 years, pressed her lips together. A younger guy named Tomas looked down at the floor. Nobody said anything. That's what happens in those moments. People freeze. Derek finished his tirade by picking up the printed report, shaking it once more and saying, "Fix it, and next time do your job right." Then he walked away, just like that, like it was nothing. Marco sat back down slowly. He looked at his screen. He started typing. Sophia reached over quietly and placed her small hand on top of his. He stopped typing. He looked at her hand. He took one slow breath, and he kept working. What Derek Hollis did not know was that someone else was in that building. Someone who was not supposed to be there that day. Her name was Patricia Okonkwo. She was 57 years old. Sharp eyes, quiet presence, and the kind of energy that makes a room shift when she walks in. Patricia Okonkwo was a founder and owner of Pinnacle Supply Company. She had built that company from nothing, starting with a single delivery van and a storage unit 22 years ago. She was worth more money than most people in that building would ever see. But she didn't act like it. She dressed simply. She drove herself. She didn't announce her visits in advance. She had learned long ago that the best way to understand what was really happening in a company was to show up unannounced and observe. She had come that Thursday to review a potential expansion into a new warehouse space. She was doing a quiet walkthrough with her assistant when the shouting started. She stopped walking. She turned her head toward the sound, and she watched. She watched Derek Hollis humiliate Marco Rivera in front of his daughter, in front of his co-workers, over a vendor error that was clearly not Marco's fault. She said nothing. She did not intervene. Not yet, but her assistant noticed that her jaw had gone tight, that her eyes had gone very still. Those who knew Patricia well knew what that stillness meant. It meant she had seen enough. And it meant that whatever came next would be very, very different from what Derek Hollis expected. The rest of that afternoon was quiet. Too quiet. After Derek walked away, the warehouse floor slowly came back to life. Machines beeped. Forklifts moved. People talked again, carefully, in low voices. Marco worked through the vendor error. He had it resolved in 40 minutes. He sent the corrected documentation, updated the shipment records, and filed a formal note in the system explaining the source of the original mistake. He did it all calmly, precisely, like a man who refused to give anyone a reason to come back at him. Sophia sat beside him and colored. She finished a drawing of a house with a garden and a big sun. She showed it to her father, and he smiled. A real smile, tired but genuine. At 3 o'clock, his shift ended. Marco signed out, packed his bag, and held Sophia's hand as they walked to the bus stop. On the way, Sophia looked up at him and said, "Papi, that man was mean to you." Marco nodded. "Yes, Mija. Sometimes people are mean. Why didn't you say something back?" He thought about it for a moment. "Because I have more important things to protect than my pride." She didn't say anything else, but she leaned against his arm as they walked. That evening, Marco made dinner. Chicken and rice, simple and warm. They watched a little TV. He helped her with her math homework. He put her to bed. He sat in the kitchen for a long time after, staring at the table. He was not a man who usually let things get to him, but that night it got to him. What happened that Thursday was not the first time, not even close. Derek Hollis had a pattern, and those who had worked at Pinnacle Supply Company long enough knew it well. He had been hired as a regional manager 4 years ago, brought in from a larger company with a reputation for results-driven leadership, which, in practice, meant he pushed hard, criticized loudly, and took credit quietly. 3 employees had left the company in the past 2 years, and most people on the floor knew why. But HR reports were written carefully, and complaints were soft-pedaled. Derek knew how to play the game. He was friendly upstairs and brutal downstairs. He charmed the executives and exhausted the workers, and he had chosen Marco as one of his favorite targets. Why? Some people said it was because Marco was too good at his job, and it threatened Derek. Others said it was simpler than that. Derek was the kind of man who needed someone to look down on, and Marco never looked back. He didn't fight. He didn't complain. He just kept working. And somehow, that made Derek worse, not better. It was as if Marco's quiet dignity annoyed him, as if a man who refused to be destroyed was a personal insult. Rosa, the woman who had pressed her lips together on the warehouse floor, had spoken to HR once. Nothing had changed. Tomas, the younger guy, had stopped trying. He just kept his head down, too. The whole floor had learned to survive Derek, not resist him. Until that Thursday, none of them knew that the one person who could actually stop him had been standing in the building all along. Patricia Okonkwo had not built her company by being careless. She was a daughter of a Nigerian father and a Mexican-American mother, raised in Houston, Texas. She grew up bilingual, hardworking, and deeply aware of what it meant to be underestimated. She had started Pinnacle Supply Company in her mid-30s, after spending years working in logistics for other companies. She knew the industry inside out. But more than that, she knew people. She had a skill that no business school could teach. She could walk into a room and, within minutes, understand who was carrying the weight and who was just wearing the uniform. She had made good hires. She had made some bad ones, too. Derek Hollis had seemed, on paper, like the right choice. Strong track record, confident, results-oriented. What the paper had not told her was the difference between a leader who builds people up and one who tears them down. She had been hearing small signals for months. Nothing definitive. A slight dip in morale scores. A couple of quiet resignations. Numbers that were fine, but never better than fine. She had made a note to observe more closely. That Thursday, she saw what she needed to see. She did not make emotional decisions. She made precise ones. But what she had witnessed on that warehouse floor had crossed a line that she did not forgive. A man had been humiliated in front of his child, in her building, by her hire. That was not results-driven leadership. That was cruelty. And Patricia Okonkwo did not run a cruel company. Marco was at the kitchen table on Friday morning when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. It was an unknown number, and he was helping Sophia find her left shoe before school. But he picked up, "Mr. Rivera?" The voice was calm, professional, female. "This is Patricia Okonkwo. I'm the founder of Pinnacle Supply Company." Marco froze. He had heard her name. Everyone at the company had, but he had never spoken to her. She was a kind of name that existed in a different world from his. "I'd like to meet with you today," she said. "This afternoon, if possible." My assistant will send you the location. Marco almost asked if he was in trouble. He stopped himself. Of course, he said. I'll be there. After he hung up, he sat very still for a moment. His hands were flat on the table. His mind was running fast. He thought about the vendor error. He thought about the Thursday scene. He thought about Derek. He thought about whether he was about to be fired. Then Sophia appeared in the kitchen, left shoe finally on, backpack ready. Who was that, Poppy? Work, he said simply. I have a meeting later. Are you okay? She was 9 years old and already reading him like a book. He smiled. I'm always okay. He dropped her at school. He went home and ironed his best shirt. He didn't owe many nice things, but what he had, he kept in good condition. He left for the meeting early. He did not know that this meeting was going to change the direction of his life. But somewhere in his chest, something quietly shifted. The address Patricia's assistant sent was not the Pinnacle main office. It was a quiet building downtown, where Patricia had a private suite she used for sensitive conversations. Marco arrived 8 minutes early. He sat in a clean, simple waiting area, hands folded, back straight. Patricia walked in at exactly the scheduled time. She was shorter than he expected. She wore no jewelry except simple stud earrings. She shook his hand firmly and looked him directly in the eyes. Thank you for coming, Mr. Rivera. Of course. They sat across from each other at a small table. She had no papers in front of her, no laptop, just a glass of water and her full attention. I was in your building yesterday, she said. I saw what happened. Marco held very still. I saw how Mr. Hollis spoke to you, she continued. I saw your daughter sitting next to you, and I watched how you handled it. She paused. Can you tell me, in your own words, what the situation was with the vendor error? Marco explained it clearly and without emotion. He described the documentation issue, the steps he had taken, the timeline of resolution. He had it fixed in 40 minutes. She nodded slowly as he spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Rivera, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Go ahead, he said. Do you believe that what happened yesterday was representative of how things normally work on that floor? Marco looked at her, really looked at her, and then, for the first time in a long time, he told the truth. It wasn't easy. He had spent 6 years keeping his head down, 6 years staying quiet, staying careful, staying in his lane, because that's what you do when you have one income and one child and no safety net. You protect your job. You don't rock the boat. But she had asked him directly, and she was the owner, and something about the way she looked at him, steady, no agenda, just listening, made him feel like maybe, this once, the truth was the right move. Yes, he said, what happened yesterday is representative. He didn't say it bitterly. He said the way he said everything, quietly, clearly, like reading a fact from a report. He told her about the pattern. He told her about the 3 employees who had left. He told her about Rose's HR complaint that went nowhere. He told her about the credit taking, the public criticisms, the way the whole floor had learned to brace for Derek's moods. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't perform. He just laid it out. Patricia listened without interrupting. She asked a few clarifying questions. Her voice stayed neutral, but her eyes were doing something different. They were working, processing, sorting through what he was saying with the efficiency of someone who had made 1,000 judgment calls and knew the difference between complaint and a truth. When he finished, she thanked him. She said she would be in contact. She stood, shook his hand again, and walked him to the door. In the elevator down, Marco exhaled slowly. He had no idea what came next. He had done what felt right, and now he just had to wait. Derek Hollis went through that Friday like any other day. He arrived at the office at 8:30, coffee in hand, loud and self-assured. He made 2 comments in the morning meeting that nobody laughed at. He reviewed some reports. He sent a few sharp emails. He stopped by the warehouse floor around noon and gave a curt nod to the workers. He didn't speak to Marco. He barely glanced at him. That was typical. After a blow-up like Thursday, Derek would usually cool off and pretend nothing had happened. It was part of his pattern. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a reset like pressing a button. The world, according to Derek, was simple. He was the authority. Others were below him, and authority didn't explain itself to workers. He went to lunch with another manager, talked about the upcoming quarter, made a joke about needing better people on the warehouse team. He had no idea that 30 blocks away, the woman who owned the entire company had just spent 40 minutes listening to exactly what kind of manager he was. He had no idea that his name had already been written at the top of the list. He went home that Friday in a good mood. He made plans for the weekend. He sent a confident email to his own supervisor about exceeding Q4 targets. He slept well. Some people sleep, well, right up until the moment everything changes. Derek Hollis was that kind of person. Patricia Okonkwo did not act on emotion alone. That was one of the rules she had built her company on. You do not make major decisions based on one observation, no matter how clear. You verify, you gather, you confirm. By Monday morning, her chief of operations had quietly begun a review. Nothing announced, nothing dramatic, just a careful look at the data that already existed. And the data was telling. Employee turnover in Derek's department was 2.3 times the company average. The 3 employees who had left in the past 2 years had all listed management style in their exit surveys. One had written 3 full paragraphs. The morale scores from the last internal survey showed Derek's team at the bottom third of the company. The HR complaint Rose had filed was there in the records, marked as reviewed and resolved. But there were no notes on what the resolution actually was. There were performance reviews that Derek had submitted, and when you compare them to actual output data, the numbers didn't match. He was rating certain people poorly, consistently, without evidence. And those people happened to be the ones on his floor who pushed back on him, even gently. Marco Rivera had a spotless performance record. Every objective metric, every deadline, every audit, clean. And yet his reviews from Derek were consistently marked as meets expectations and nothing more. Never above, never recognized. It was precise suppression. Not loud enough to trigger anything. Just enough to keep a good man stuck. Patricia's team also spoke with other employees. They were careful. They framed it as a general satisfaction review. Standard practice. They said, voluntary and confidential. Rosa Mendez, who had been on the warehouse floor for 4 years, agreed to speak. She was careful at first. Measured. She talked about workload and scheduling. But when the interviewer asked gently whether she felt comfortable bringing concerns to her direct management, Rosa paused. Then she said, no. And then she said more. She talked about the Thursday incident. She talked about previous ones. She mentioned a time Derek had mocked a worker's accent during a meeting. She mentioned a time he had announced someone's personal family situation in front of the whole team as justification for why he was cutting them slack, which the person never asked for and found humiliating. She mentioned that she had tried HR once and nothing had changed. She mentioned that most people on the floor had simply accepted this as normal because they needed their jobs. When Rosa finished, she looked at the interviewer and said, "Are you actually going to do something this time?" Tomas Guerrero, 26 years old and relatively new, was even more direct. "Derek runs that floor through fear," he said. "Not respect, just fear." He described the day of the Thursday incident as one of the worst things I've seen at a job. He said he had considered quitting 3 times in the past 8 months. He had stayed only because Marco had once pulled him aside and quietly told him not to let one bad person drive him away from a good company. He said, "That man, he's the best person in that building, and Derek treats him like dirt." By Wednesday of the following week, Patricia Okonkwo had everything she needed. She sat in her office on the 14th floor and read through the compiled review. It was thorough, documented, undeniable. She thought about what she had seen on that warehouse floor. A man, standing straight, absorbing cruelty in front of his daughter, and choosing dignity over reaction. She thought about what Tomas had said. She thought about Rosa's question. "Are you actually going to do something this time?" She picked up the phone and called her chief of operations. "Schedule a meeting with Derek Hollis for Friday morning," she said. 9 o'clock. My office. Then she made a second call. This one was to her head of human resources. "I want to begin the process for a department leadership review," she said. And I want to talk about something else, a recognition issue. She had a habit, when she found people who were underpaid and underrecognized for actual contributions, of correcting it quickly and completely. She did not believe in slow bureaucratic fixes. When the problem was clear, Marco Rivera had been capped at the same salary grade for 3 years. He had been denied a formal team lead title despite doing the work of one. He had been quietly blocked, and he had never complained. Not once. That, to Patricia, was not a virtue to be exploited. It was a wrong to be corrected. She began writing a list. It was a short list, but every word on it was going to matter. Friday morning, Derek Hollis arrived at the main office at 8:55. His assistant had told him only that Patricia wanted to meet. He had assumed it was a general check-in, possibly something related to the Q4 expansion he had been positioning himself for. He straightened his jacket in the elevator. He rehearsed a few talking points about his team's performance. He walked into her office with his usual confident stride. Patricia was seated behind her desk. Her chief of operations was there too, seated to the side with a folder in front of him. No small talk, no coffee offer. Patricia looked at Derek and said, "Please sit down." He sat. She said, "We've completed a review of your department over the past 2 weeks. I want to discuss what we found." The next 45 minutes were methodical, not dramatic, not heated. Patricia laid out the data, the turnover numbers, the exit survey patterns, the morale scores, the HR complaint, and the lack of meaningful follow-up, the performance reviews that didn't match objective data. She read specific examples with dates. Derek tried to respond. He used words like high standards and accountability culture, and some people can't handle pressure. Patricia let him speak. Then she returned to the data, quietly and precisely. Each time, she did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When she finished, Derek's confident posture had changed. His shoulders were lower. His jaw was tight. She folded her hands and said, "We are making some changes, and I want to be clear with you about what they are." Derek Hollis was removed from his management position that day. It was handled professionally and privately. He was given a choice between a non-supervisory role in a different department or a separation package. He took the package. He left the building by noon. His office was cleared over the weekend. By Monday morning, most people on the warehouse floor didn't even know it had happened yet. They came in, started their shifts, and noticed only that Derek wasn't there. No one asked immediately. A few people exchanged glances. Rosa caught Tomas's eye across the room and gave a slight nod. They both went back to work. There was no announcement yet, no drama, just a quiet absence where a loud presence had been. Marco arrived at his usual time, 5:58. He logged in. He checked his shipment board. He made a note about a vendor delivery schedule for the afternoon. He was halfway through his second coffee when his supervisor, a mid-level manager named Greg, came by and told him he had a meeting at 10 with the operations team. Marco nodded. He kept working. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that the meeting at 10 was not about a shipment problem. It was not about a vendor error. It was not a performance review. It was about something entirely different, something that he had not allowed himself to hope for, because hope, for a man in his position, could be a dangerous thing. But it was coming, ready or not. The meeting was in a conference room on the second floor. When Marco walked in, he saw Patricia Alconquo sitting at the table. He stopped for just 1 second in the doorway. Then he walked in and sat down. She thanked him for coming. She told him that the company had completed a review and that some changes had been made. She did not go into specifics about Derek. She didn't need to. She moved directly to what mattered. "Mr. Rivera," she said, "we've looked carefully at your 6 years with this company, your performance record, your consistency, your technical knowledge, the way your team responds to you, which, I'll be honest with you, is better than it should be given that you've never been given any official authority." She paused. "We'd like to offer you a formal promotion. Team lead for warehouse operations, West Division." Marco kept his face steady. He had learned long ago to keep his face steady. "The salary adjustment would be significant," she continued. She named a number. It was more than he had made in any year of his life. He breathed very carefully. There would also be a retroactive bonus, she said, reflecting the gap between what you were paid and what you should have been paid over the past 3 years. She slid a folder across the table. I'd like you to take your time and review this. Ask questions. Think it over. Marco looked at the folder. Then he looked at her. He said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you doing this?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Because it's right." He drove home in a daze. Not the bad kind. The kind where too much good information is trying to find space in a brain trained to manage bad news. He sat in the car in the parking lot of his apartment building for a few minutes, just breathing. He thought about Carmen. He talked to her sometimes. Not out loud, usually, just in his mind. He told her. He told her what had happened. He told her the number that had been written in that folder. He told her that Sophia was going to be okay. More than okay. He sat there for maybe 10 minutes. Then he got out, took the stairs up to their apartment, and started making dinner. Not because it was time to make dinner. It was only 2 in the afternoon, but he needed to do something with his hands. He was cutting onions when Sophia came home from school. She dropped her backpack by the door, noticed him in the kitchen, and said, "You're home early." "Yeah," he said. "Good day." She came and stood next to him at the counter. She watched him cook for a while. Then she said, "Did something happen?" He laughed. Not a big laugh. A quiet one. "Mija," he said, "remember when I told you that sometimes people are mean, but you just keep doing the right thing?" She nodded. "Well," he said, "today was an example of what happens when you keep doing the right thing." She looked up at him. He was smiling. She smiled back. "Tell me," she said. So he told her. He told her the simple version. He kept it for 9-year-old ears. He said that the owner of the company had noticed how hard he worked, that she had decided to give him a better position, with more responsibility and better pay. He didn't mention Derek's removal. He didn't get into the investigation, or the performance reviews, or the salary review. He just said that good things were coming. Sophia listened very carefully, the way she always did. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So the mean man didn't win?" It wasn't a question. Marco nodded. "No, Mija, he didn't." She was quiet again. Then, "I wasn't scared of him, you know. On Thursday, I was just sad. Sad. Sad for you," she said, "because you had to just stand there and take it. And I knew you were doing it for me, so I wouldn't see you get in trouble." Marco set down his knife. He looked at his daughter. 9 years old. She had understood, in that moment on the warehouse floor, exactly what her father was doing and why. And she had stayed quiet to protect him too. He hugged her, long and tight. She hugged him back just as hard. "We protect each other," he said into her hair. "Yeah," she said. "We do." That evening, they didn't talk much more about it. They ate dinner. They watched their show. He helped her finish her drawing of the house with the garden. And for the first time in a long time, the apartment felt lighter, like a weight had been quietly lifted from the ceiling and set outside. Marco accepted the offer the following Monday. He signed the papers, shook hands with the HR director and Patricia's operations chief, and went back to the warehouse floor. Nothing changed visibly that first day. He wore the same clothes. He arrived at the same time. He drank his same coffee. But something had shifted in how he carried himself. Not arrogance, not performance. Just a kind of ease that had not been there before. An ease that comes from a man who no longer has to brace for something every time he hears his name called. The formal announcement was made at the morning huddle. Greg introduced him as the new team lead for warehouse operations, West Division. There was a brief applause. Rosa grinned and clapped hard. Tomas gave him a quick, solid nod. A few newer workers looked at him with fresh eyes. Marco said a few words. He didn't make a speech. He said he was honored, that he expected nothing from anyone except what they already gave, and that his door was always open. 10 seconds. Clear and simple. Then they went to work. By end of day, 3 small things had already changed. A scheduling conflict that had been dragging for weeks was resolved. A vendor communication loop that was causing delays was streamlined, and 2 workers came to Marco, separately, with questions they had previously felt uncomfortable raising. He answered both. He stayed 15 minutes late to make sure one issue was fully closed. Just like always, except now, it was part of the job description. These things don't stay quiet for long. By the end of that first week, the full story was circulating through the company. Not the official version, the real version, the one whispered in break rooms and parking lots. People who weren't even in that warehouse on the Thursday had heard about what Derek had done, and now people were connecting the dots. Derek was gone. Marco was team lead. Patricia had been there that day. The math was obvious. Reactions varied. Most people were quietly pleased. A few of the more cynical employees waited to see if the promotion would actually stick or if it was just optics. One manager in another department, who had been friendly with Derek, made a comment to his team about performance metrics that nobody took seriously. And outside the company, in the larger logistics industry network of San Antonio, the story spread a different way. Patricia Okonkwo had a reputation for being principled. This confirmed it. She had seen something wrong and fixed it without theater. People who had been reluctant to apply to Pinnacle suddenly became interested. 2 experienced coordinators sent in their applications that month. Someone wrote about it on Professional Forum. No names. Just a company where the owner shows up unannounced and actually watches. It got more than 300 responses. Most of them said some version of the same thing. They wish their own company worked like that. But it takes more than a wish. It takes someone at the top who actually cares about what happens at the bottom. Not everyone has that. Marco Rivera did. In his new role, Marco did something that surprised some people. He didn't arrive with a new system or a reorganization plan. He arrived with questions. He spent his first 2 weeks asking, what's slowing you down? Where do you feel invisible? What do you need that you're not getting? He asked people who had been there for years and people who had started 6 months ago. He asked Rosa. He asked Tomas. He asked a quiet guy in the back corner, Eduardo, who had been with the company for 9 years and had never once been asked his opinion by anyone in management. Eduardo gave him 45 minutes of operational gold, problems that had been sitting unsolved because nobody with authority had ever stopped to listen. Marco wrote it all down. Then he started fixing things, one at a time. No big announcements, just results. A recurring inventory discrepancy that had been creating monthly stress, solved in 3 days with a process adjustment and a clearer vendor communication template. A scheduling gap on Tuesdays that always left the team short, filled by a minor rotation that 4 people had already informally suggested to previous managers who hadn't listened. The team began to notice, not just that things were getting fixed, but that they were the ones doing it, that Marco was channeling their knowledge, not replacing it with his own. That's a rare skill in a manager. The floor felt different, not louder, not more dramatic, just steadier, like a ship that had found its course. 2 months after the promotion, Sophia's school had a career day. Parents were invited to come in and talk to the class about their work. Sophia asked her father to come. Marco agreed immediately. He had never missed a school event, not one. He showed up in his work shirt, a Pinnacle Supply Company badge clipped to his pocket, and stood in front of 23 fourth graders. The teacher introduced him as Sophia's father, who works in logistics and warehouse management. Marco looked at the class. 23 small faces, curious and fidgety. He thought about how to explain what he did. He said, "Has anyone ever ordered something online and then it arrived at your house?" Almost every hand went up. He said, "Someone like me made sure it got there." He talked about coordination, about how thousands of items move from factories to warehouses to trucks to front doors every single day, about how one wrong number on a spreadsheet can delay a shipment that someone was waiting for, about how the people on warehouse floors, the ones in back, the ones you never see, are the ones making the whole thing work. He kept it simple. He used no complicated words. At the end, one kid in the back raised his hand and asked, "Do you like your job?" Marco thought about that for a second. Then he said, "I like the people I work with, and I like that the work matters." "Yeah, I like it." Sophia was sitting in the 3rd row. She was beaming. He saw it. He smiled back. And that quietly was one of the best moments of his year. Derek Hollis took the separation package and left San Antonio within a month. He found a position at a smaller company in Dallas, warehouse management. Again, but now in a smaller pond. He told the story of leaving Pinnacle to people he met as a strategic career move. He reinvented the narrative the way people do when they can't admit a mistake. He never acknowledged what he had done. He never sat in a quiet room and thought about the man he had humiliated, or the little girl who had watched, or the years of quiet suppression that kept a good worker from advancing. Some people are like that. They go through life leaving messes and never looking back at them. The mess doesn't disappear just because they looked away, but they never feel it. And in some ways, that is its own kind of prison. Marco never knew what happened to Derek after that. He didn't look for that information. He wasn't carrying anger. He had moved on before Derek had even packed his office, because Marco Rivera had always understood something that Derek Hollis never did. Your value doesn't come from the title someone gives you. It comes from the work you do and the people who watch you do it. Derek had spent his whole career chasing titles. Marco had spent his building trust. When the titles were finally handed out, they went to the right person, the one who had earned them 1,000 quiet times, before anyone with power was watching. And on that Thursday in October, someone with power finally was. 1 year after that Thursday, Marco Rivera was sitting in a quarterly review with Patricia Okonkwo's operations team. He was presenting data, his department's numbers. Turnover in his team had dropped to the lowest in the company. On-time delivery accuracy had gone up. Employee satisfaction scores as division were the highest they had been in 5 years. He didn't bring these numbers in to impress anyone. He brought them because they were accurate, because they reflected what happened when people felt seen and treated with respect. Patricia looked at the report from across the table. She said, "This is excellent work, Marco." He said, "It's the team's work. I just stopped getting in the way." She smiled at that. Small but real. That was the kind of answer she hired for. That evening, Marco picked up Sophia from her after-school program. She had started taking drawing lessons. She showed him a portrait she had made in class that day. It was a face. Eyes steady. Small smile. Strong jaw. "Who's that?" he asked. She looked at him like the answer was obvious. "It's you, Poppy." He looked at it for a long moment. He didn't look like much to some people. But to her, he was worth drawing. Worth capturing on paper, worth keeping. He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He carried it there for a week before he finally framed it and put it on the wall above his desk at home. And this is the kind of story that we love to tell here on Addictive Stories. Because it's real, because it happens, and because sometimes justice finds the right person at exactly the right moment. After the quarterly review, Patricia's assistant mentioned to her that a logistics trade magazine wanted to profile her for a piece on workplace culture. They had heard about the changes at Pinnacle. They had heard about the internal review. They wanted quotes. Patricia declined the profile. She didn't need press for doing the right thing. But her assistant asked her, privately, while they were walking to the elevator, "Why did you act so fast? You'd been at the company before without making changes like this." Patricia pressed the elevator button and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because I saw a man choose his child over his ego. He stood there, in front of his daughter, and he chose dignity over reaction. He chose her stability over his pride." The elevator arrived. They stepped in. "That kind of character," she said, "is what I built this company on, and I was not going to let it go unrewarded." The assistant nodded. They rode down in silence. But what Patricia hadn't said, what she kept private, was the other part. She had seen something in that moment on the warehouse floor that had hit close to home. Her own father had worked a floor like that, in Houston, for 17 years. A quiet, capable man who'd been passed over and talked over and underestimated, consistently, by managers who saw his work and not his worth. He had never gotten his Thursday. She had built an entire company partly to make sure other people would. And on that October afternoon in the San Antonio warehouse, she had finally been in the right place to deliver it. Word of Marco's story spread in ways he didn't fully expect. A co-worker shared a version of it on a community forum for working parents in San Antonio. It was shared several hundred times in a week. People left comments. Many of them were from fathers. Single fathers, specifically. Men who talk about the specific exhaustion of being the only provider, the only parent, the only stable point in a child's world. Men who talked about having been humiliated at work and saying nothing, not because they were weak, but because they had children depending on them. Men who talked about the invisible math of parenthood. Every risk you don't take, every fight you don't pick, every moment you swallow your pride, calculated against what it means to keep the lights on and keep your kid safe. Marco was asked to speak at a local community center. He almost said no. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't an inspiration. He was just a man. But Sophia heard about the invitation and said, "Go, Poppy." So he went. He stood up in a room of about 40 people and said mostly what he always said: keep doing the right thing. Not because someone will notice, not because you'll be rewarded, just because it's right. And if someone does notice, and it does pay off, that's good. But the work still has to come first. He said that parenting had taught him more about patience and consistency than any job ever had. He said that being a single dad was the hardest and most important thing he had ever done. He got a standing ovation. He was embarrassed by it. But Sophia was in the back row, standing and clapping harder than anyone. Marco Rivera's story is not unique. That is both the saddest and the most hopeful part of it. There are thousands of men and women just like him. People who show up early and stay late and never get the credit. People who have everything it takes, except the person in power to finally see it. People who are suppressed not because they're failing, but because they're inconvenient to someone's ego. We live in a world where a loud, aggressive manager can run a department for years because the noise looks like leadership to the people above, and only the people below know what it really is. And the people below, they're afraid to speak because speaking costs money, because money feeds kids. And until someone with real authority really watches, and chooses to do something about it, the cycle continues. This is why Patricia Okonkwo's decision matters beyond one man's career. She modeled something rare. She used power to correct injustice rather than protect itself. She moved quickly when the evidence was clear. She didn't wait for the right political moment. She just did it. Not every company has a Patricia. Not every Marco gets his Thursday. But the ones that do, they remember for the rest of their lives. And sometimes they carry that example forward into how they lead, into how they treat the people below them, into what they tell their children about dignity, about patience, and about what it means to be the kind of person worth watching. Marco Rivera became that kind of person long before anyone in power was watching. That's what made the watching matter when it finally happened. And that is the story of Marco Rivera, a man who never stopped doing the right thing, even when nobody seemed to be watching. A man who stood in front of his daughter and chose dignity over explosion, patience over rage, and love over pride. He didn't win because he fought back louder. He won because he never stopped being who he was. Because the truth has a way of surviving, even when it's buried under a bad manager's ego and 6 years of quiet injustice. It survives. And sometimes it arrives in the form of a woman who walks into a warehouse unannounced and stands in the back and watches. Sophia kept that drawing, the portrait she made of her father, in her drawing class. It still hangs above his desk. He looks at it every morning before he leaves for work. This is the kind of story we believe in here at Addictive Stories. Not because it's perfect, not because justice always comes this fast or this clean, but because it happened. Because real people like Marco exist. And because if you are one of them, if you are quietly showing up, quietly doing the work, quietly holding everything together for someone who depends on you, we want you to know that your story is worth telling too. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A father, a friend, someone who's been overlooked, someone who's still waiting for their Thursday. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because we have more stories like this one. Stories about the people who keep going when going is hard. We'll see you in the next one.